My father handed my CEO position to my incompetent sister because she had the right look. He told me to stay hidden in the back office. So I quit, joined our biggest client, and watched their empire burn until I bought it for scraps. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The champagne flute in my hand felt dangerously fragile, liable to snap under the pressure of my grip. I stared into the golden liquid, watching the tiny bubbles rise and burst, much like the nervous energy fluttering in my chest. This was it. 12 years. 12 years of missing holidays, sleeping on an office cot, eating vending machine dinners, and effectively erasing my social life to turn my father's struggling local transport firm into a regional logistics powerhouse. Tonight was the company's 30th anniversary gala, but more importantly, it was the night Harry, my father, was finally stepping down. It was the night I would officially be named CEO. It wasn't a surprise, or at least, I didn't think it was. It was the logical conclusion to a decade of grueling labor. I had written the operating procedures. I had secured the contracts. I was the one who knew the name of every driver and the cubic footage of every warehouse. "Everyone, if I could have your attention," Harry's voice boomed over the microphone. The room, a rented ballroom in the city's finest hotel, fell silent. I looked up at the stage. My father looked distinguished in his tuxedo, his silver hair perfectly coiffed. Beside him stood my mother, Madeline, beaming with a pride that I assumed was directed at me. And then there was Megan, my younger sister. She was wearing a dress that likely cost more than my first car, shimmering under the stage lights. She smiled that practiced, camera-ready smile she used for her Instagram followers. I took a breath, straightening my shoulders. I prepared my face for the humility and gratitude I was expected to show. 30 years, Harry began, his voice thick with performative emotion. 30 years of blood, sweat, and tears. But a company is nothing without its future. It is nothing without a vision that adapts to the modern world. He paused for dramatic effect. I took a step forward, ready to ascend the stairs. "That is why," he continued, his eyes scanning the crowd, "I am thrilled to announce the new CEO of our family legacy. Someone who represents the youth, the vibrancy, and the modern face of this brand. Please join me in congratulating Megan." The silence in my head was absolute. It was a deafening void that swallowed the sound of the applause erupting around me. I froze, my foot hovering an inch off the floor before I slowly placed it back down. "Megan." I blinked, sure I had misheard. Megan, who had spent the last 5 years finding herself in Bali and Chelum. Megan, whose only contribution to the company had been a suggestion to paint the delivery trucks pink to be more viral. I watched as Megan squealed, throwing her arms around our father. Madeline clapped furiously, tears in her eyes, looking at Megan as if she were a messiah. I stood paralyzed in the center of the room. A few of the senior managers turned to look at me, their expressions a mix of confusion and pity. That pity was the sharpest blade of all. It sliced through my shock, replacing the numbness with a cold, jagged agony. I didn't move toward the stage. I couldn't. I watched my father hand Megan the symbolic oversized key to the headquarters. She held it up, posing for the photographer, tilting her head just so to catch the light. She didn't look at the employees. She didn't look at the partners. She looked at the lens. Harry grabbed the mic again. "Megan is the future. She is the face we need to take us to the next level." The room swirled. The applause sounded like static. I felt bile rise in my throat, a physical rejection of the reality unfolding before me. I had built the engine of this machine, and they had just handed the keys to someone who didn't even know how to drive. I turned on my heel, setting the champagne glass down on a passing waiter's tray with a trembling hand. I needed air. I needed to escape the suffocation of their betrayal. As I pushed through the double doors onto the balcony, the cool night air hit my face, but it did nothing to cool the burning shame. The betrayal wasn't just professional. It was a total erasure of my existence. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my apartment, staring at the wall, replaying the moment over and over. Every clap of applause for Megan felt like a slap to my face. The next morning, I went into the office. I had to. I needed an explanation. I needed to hear Harry say it to my face without an audience. When I walked into the boardroom, they were already there. Harry sat at tea. He head of the table, looking relaxed, a mug of coffee in his hand. Megan was sitting in my usual chair, the chair to his right, scrolling through her phone. Madeline was there too, flipping through a magazine, acting as the emotional bodyguard. "Olivia," Harry said, his tone jovial, as if he hadn't just nuked my career 12 hours prior. "We missed you at the after-party. Megan ordered bottle service." I wasn't in the mood for celebration, I said, my voice hoarse. I refused to sit. Standing felt like my only defense. "Dad, we need to talk about last night." Megan looked up, rolling her eyes. "Oh, here we go. Don't be a sore loser, Liv. It's not a good look." "A sore loser?" I gripped the back of a leather chair, my knuckles turning white. "Megan, you don't know the difference between a balance sheet and a bill of lading. Do you have any idea what it takes to run this company? We have 300 employees. We have complex regulatory compliances. We have people for that," Harry interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. "That's what you don't understand, Olivia." He stood up and walked over to me, placing a hand on my shoulder. I flinched, but he didn't seem to notice. "Look, honey," he said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone he used when I was a child. "You are brilliant, truly. You are a wizard with the logistics, the numbers, the boring stuff. But let's be honest. You aren't CEO material." "Excuse me," I whispered. "You're stiff," he said, gesturing vaguely at my blazer and slacks. "You're serious, your intensity. In this market, we need charisma. We need a brand. Megan is the face of the family. She shines. People want to buy from someone they like, someone they want to be." Madeline chimed in from the corner, not even looking up from her magazine. "It's true, darling. You've always been happier in the background. You like your spreadsheets. Megan was born for the spotlight. We're just playing to everyone's strengths." "My strength is running the company," I snapped. "Megan's strength is taking selfies." "And that is exactly why she is CEO," Harry said, his voice hardening. "She will handle the public, the image, the vision. You, Olivia, will remain as COO. You'll run the day-to-day. You'll do exactly what you've been doing, but you'll report to Megan. It's the perfect system. You do the work, she sells it." I stared at him, the cruelty of his logic sinking in. He didn't want a CEO, he wanted a mascot. And he wanted me to be the engine room's slave, shoveling coal in the dark while Megan waved from the deck. "You expect me to report to her?" I asked, looking at Megan. She smirked, tapping her long acrylic nails on the mahogany table. "Ideally, I'd like a morning briefing on my desk by 9:00 a.m., Megan said, her voice dripping with newfound authority. "And Liv, try to shorten the reports. I don't read anything over 1 page." The disrespect was physical. It felt like a punch to the gut. They weren't just passing me over, they were enslaving me to my own incompetent sister. They wanted my brain, but they didn't want me. "I won't do it," I said quietly. Harry sighed, disappointed. "Don't be dramatic. Where else are you going to go? You've spent your whole life here. You're a part of the furniture." Part of the furniture. That was all I was to them. Useful, necessary, but ultimately inanimate and invisible. I looked at Harry, then at Madeline, and finally at Megan. They looked so comfortable, so assured of their power over me. They thought they held all the cards because the name on the building was the family name. But as I looked at the stack of files on the table, specifically the thick blue folder labeled James/Nexus Global, a cold, sharp clarity washed over me. Harry had forgotten one crucial thing. He thought the clients were loyal to the logo. He didn't realize that for the last 5 years, James, the CEO of our biggest client, hadn't called the office line. He called my cell phone. "You're right, Dad," I said, forcing a tight, hollow smile. "I am good at the boring stuff." I turned to leave, my mind already racing, calculating, planning. "That's my girl," Harry called out, thinking he had won. "See you Monday, Liv." I didn't answer. As I walked to the elevator, the foreshadowing of their destruction wasn't a whisper, it was a scream. They wanted me in the background? Fine. I would go so far into the background they wouldn't even see me pulling the rug out from under them. To understand the weight of this betrayal, you have to understand the sacrifice. I started working for my father when I was 22, fresh out of business school with a terrifying amount of debt and a head full of ideas. Back then, the company was a mess. Harry was a handshake guy. He did deals on the golf course and forgot to write them down. We were bleeding money. Drivers were quitting, shipments were lost, and we were on the brink of bankruptcy. I stepped in. I didn't take a salary for the first 2 years. I lived in a studio apartment the size of a closet. I taught myself coding to build a custom tracking system because we couldn't afford the enterprise software. I fired the lazy friends Harry had hired and replaced them with competent professionals. I negotiated fuel contracts at 2:00 a.m. with suppliers in different time zones. I built the skeleton, the muscles, and the brain of the company. Harry just put on the suit and took the credit. And then there was Megan. Megan was 4 years younger and the apple of Harry's eye. While I was in the warehouse doing inventory on Christmas Eve, Megan was on ski trips funded by the company credit card, expense labeled as client relations. I remembered a specific incident 3 years ago. We had a crisis. A fleet of trucks was stuck in a blizzard in the Rockies, carrying perishable medical supplies. I stayed in the office for 72 hours straight, coordinating with local authorities, hiring independent contractors with chains, and rerouting the entire supply chain to save the contract. When I finally went home, exhausted and smelling of stale coffee, I found Harry and Megan in the living room. Megan was showing him a video of a cat playing a piano. "Oh, hey, Liv," Megan had said, barely looking up. "Dad said you were dealing with some truck thing. Sounds stressful. You should really try yoga. Your frown lines are getting deep." Harry had laughed. "She's right, Olivia. You worry too much. It always works out." It always worked out because I made it work out. But now, sitting in my car in the parking lot after the disastrous meeting, I realized that my devotion had been my weakness. I had made it look too easy. I had hidden the chaotic machinery so well that they actually believed the company ran on magic and good vibes. I looked at the dashboard clock. It was Friday. If I was going to make a move, I had to do it now. I thought about James. James was the CEO of Nexus Global, a massive tech distributor. 5 years ago, they were a small startup. I saw their potential. I personally convinced Harry to take them on as a client, even offering them discounted shipping rates in exchange for exclusivity. Harry had fought me on it, saying they were nobodies. I ignored him. I nurtured that account. I integrated our systems with theirs. I became their external logistics director. When they exploded into a billion-dollar company, we rode their wave. They now accounted for 80% of our revenue. Harry knew James was important, but he didn't know James. Harry sent James fruit baskets at Christmas. I solved James's problems at midnight. I pulled out my phone. I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't call a recruiter. I opened my contacts and scrolled to James' personal. The antagonist of my story wasn't just my family, it was their arrogance. Harry, with his vanity and laziness. Megan, with her entitlement and vacuous charm. They were about to learn a very hard lesson in business economics. Megan wanted to be the face? Fine. I was about to show her what happens when the body stops functioning. I pressed call. "Olivia," James's voice was warm, immediate. "Everything okay? I saw the press release about your sister. I was confused." "James," I said, my voice steady, shedding the daughter role and fully inhabiting the strategist. "I need to buy you a drink. Tonight, we need to discuss the future of your supply chain." "Is there a problem with the company?" he asked, his tone sharpening. "Not yet," I replied. "But come Monday morning, the person in charge of your entire distribution network, thinks logistics is a brand of lipstick. We need to talk about your contingency plan. There was a pause. Name the place, Olivia. I hung up. I looked up at the glass office building one last time. I could see the silhouette of Harry in his office, probably pouring another coffee, thinking he had managed to keep his workhorse in the stable while putting his show pony on the track. He had no idea the stable door was already open, and I was running straight for the competition. The restaurant James chose was a quiet, dimly lit steakhouse on the edge of the financial district, the kind of place where deals were made in hushed tones over aged scotch and mahogany tables. It was neutral ground, far away from the prying eyes of my father's social circle. I arrived first, ordering a sparkling water with lime, my hands clasped tightly on the white tablecloth to stop them from shaking. I had a plan, but it was a nuclear option. Once I pushed this button, there was no going back. I would be severing ties with my family, likely forever. When James arrived, he looked concerned. He was a sharp man in his late 40s, a visionary who had built Nexus Global from a garage operation into a tech titan. He knew people, he knew value, and most importantly, he knew me. Olivia, he said, sliding into the booth and shaking my hand firmly. Why, you looked like you were at a funeral on the phone. In a way, I was, I replied, skipping the pleasantries. James, I'm going to be direct because I respect you too much to spin this. As of Monday morning, I will be resigning from Miller Logistics. James froze, his menu halfway open. He slowly set it down. Resigning? Olivia, you are Miller Logistics. I don't think I've spoken to anyone else there in 3 years. Exactly, I said, leaning in. And that's the problem. My father has appointed my sister, Megan, as the new CEO. I've been demoted to a support role. James frowned, a look of genuine confusion crossing his face. Megan, the Instagram girl, I met her at your Christmas party. She asked me if our servers could be made in rose gold to appeal to female gamers. That's the one, I said dryly. She is now in charge of your supply chain. She is the one who will be overseeing the rollout of your new console next month. She is the one who will be managing the customs clearance for your Asian imports. I let the silence hang there. I watched the realization dawn on him. The color actually drained from his face. The launch of their new console was the biggest event in their company's history. A delay of even 48 hours could cost them millions in stock value and customer trust. She can't handle it, James stated, not as a question, but as a terrifying fact. She doesn't even know the login to the inventory system, James. She thinks logistics is just sending boxes. She has no concept of cross-docking, tariffs, or last-mile variants. If I stay, I'll be trying to steer the ship from the engine room while she spins the wheel randomly on the bridge. We will hit an iceberg, and your product launch will be the casualty. James took a sip of water, his eyes hard. So, what are you suggesting? I move my business to FedEx, DHL, we're too integrated with you. Moving now would be a nightmare. No, I said, dropping the bomb. I'm suggesting you cut out the middleman. I pulled a thin folder from my bag and slid it across the table. I've done the math. Miller Logistics charges you a 20% markup on carrier rates, plus management fees. You're spending nearly $4 million a year just on our overhead. If you bring your logistics in-house, you save that margin immediately. James opened the folder, scanning the single sheet of paper where I had outlined the cost structure. I am proposing, I continued, my voice steady, that you hire me, not as a consultant, as a partner and chief operations officer of Nexus Global. I will build an internal logistics division for you. I know the routes, I know the carriers, I know the drivers. I can have a new network up and running in 2 weeks. We lease the warehouse space directly. We hire the key drivers directly. We own the process. James looked up from the paper, a slow smile spreading across his face. It wasn't just a safety net I was offering, it was an evolution for his company. You want to cannibalize your father's business, he said softly. I want to save your business, I corrected. Miller Logistics is dead. It died last night on that stage. The only question is whether you go down with the ship or get on the lifeboat. James closed the folder and tapped it with his index finger. The non-compete. My contract expired 2 months ago, I said, a detail I had noted and kept to myself, just in case. Harry was too busy planning the gala to send me the renewal paperwork. I'm a free agent. James extended his hand across the table. Welcome to Nexus, partner. As I shook his hand, the guilt I expected to feel was absent. Instead, I felt a rush of adrenaline. I wasn't just leaving. I was taking the crown jewels with me. Monday morning at Miller Logistics was usually a flurry of activity. Phones ringing, drivers checking in, dispatchers shouting updates. But when I walked in at 8:00 a.m., the office felt strangely sluggish. I walked past the dispatch desk. The head dispatcher, an older man named Gus who had been with us for years, looked stressed. Olivia, thank God, Gus said, standing up. I've got 3 trucks stuck at the border in Laredo. The paperwork wasn't filed on Friday. I tried to call Harry, but he didn't answer. I tried to find Megan, but... Where is she? I asked calmly, clutching a small cardboard box containing my personal effects. She's in the conference room with a decorator, Gus sighed. I nodded. Do what you can, Gus. Wait, aren't you going to fix it? He asked, panic edging into his voice. Not today, Gus, I said softly and kept walking. I walked straight to the executive suite. The door to the CEO's office, my father's old office, now Megan's, was wide open. Inside, Megan was standing by the window, holding swatches of fabric against the drapes. Harry was sitting on the leather sofa, scrolling through his iPad. No, this gray is too depressing, Megan was saying to a frazzled-looking int. Interior designer, I need something that says dynamic, maybe a velvet or a neon sign on the back wall. Excuse me, I said, stepping into the room. Megan turned, looking annoyed at the interruption. Liv, good you're here. I need you to order me a new desk chair. This one smells like old man. And make sure it has lumbar support, my back is killing me from the party. Harry looked up, smiling vaguely. Morning, Olivia, ready to get back to the grind. I placed my cardboard box on the desk, right on top of a pile of unread invoices. Actually, no, I said. I'm here to give you this. I pulled a white envelope from my pocket and placed it next to the box. Harry frowned, squinting at the envelope. What is that? It's my resignation, Dad, effective immediately. The room went silent. The interior designer awkwardly shuffled her fabric samples and backed out of the room, sensing the impending explosion. Megan burst out laughing. It was a high, incredulous sound. Oh my God, stop. You are being such a drama queen. You're quitting because I got the job? That is so pathetic, Liv. I'm quitting because I refuse to work for a company that values vanity over competence, I said, my voice cool and detached. I'm quitting because I won't be the one cleaning up the mess when you inevitably crash this business. Harry stood up, his face reddening. Now hold on just a minute, young lady. You can't just walk out. We have contracts. We have obligations. Who is going to handle the Nexus account? Megan is, I said, gesturing to my sister. She's the face of the family, isn't she? I'm sure she can charm the inventory management system into working. You are being selfish, Harry spat, pointing a finger at me. After everything I've done for you, I gave you a job, I gave you a purpose. You are nothing without the Miller name. We'll see, I said. The keys to the office and the company car are in the box. My laptop is on my desk, wiped of personal data. The passwords are in a file on the server. Good luck, Megan. You're going to need it. I don't need luck, Megan shouted as I turned to leave. I have vision. Go ahead and leave. See how far you get without Dad's money. You'll be begging to come back in a month. Yeah, take a sabbatical, Harry yelled after me, his voice echoing in the hallway. Cool off, but don't expect your job to be waiting for you when you realize you've made a mistake. I walked out of the office, past the confused employees, past Gus who looked at me with wide, fearful eyes. I felt a pang of sorrow for them. They were the collateral damage in Harry's ego trip. But I couldn't save them by staying. I had to let the structure collapse to prove that I was the one holding it up. As I stepped out into the parking lot, my phone buzzed. It was a text from James. Contract signed. Welcome aboard. Lawyer is sending the termination letter to Miller Logistics at noon. I got into my own car, not the company lease, but the sedan I had bought with my own savings, and drove away. I didn't look back in the rearview mirror. I looked forward to the road ahead and to the absolute chaos that was about to unfold at noon. The unraveling didn't happen all at once. It was a slow, agonizing bleed that turned into a hemorrhage. For the first week at Nexus, I worked 16-hour days. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't tired. I was exhilarated. James gave me full autonomy. I hired a team of logistics specialists, poaching 2 of the best analysts from Miller's competitors, and we set up a temporary command center in the Nexus boardroom. By Wednesday of the first week, the bomb had officially dropped. I wasn't there to see it, but I heard about it. Gus called me on my personal cell, his voice trembling. "Olivia, they just got the letter," he whispered. James canceled the contract. 80% of the business gone. Harry is screaming in his office. He's throwing things. He thinks it's a negotiating tactic. "It's not a tactic, Gus," I said, staring at the live tracking map of the new Nexus fleet we were assembling. "It's over." "Megan is posting on Twitter," Gus continued. "She's saying we're pivoting to boutique clients. Olivia, she fired the warehouse manager because he told her she couldn't store electronics next to the industrial cleaning fluid. She said he had negative energy." "Get out, Gus," I told him. "Start looking for a new job, now." Over the next 3 months, I watched from the outside as Miller Logistics disintegrated. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion. Without the Nexus revenue, the cash flow dried up instantly. But Harry, in his arrogance, refused to downsize. He kept the expensive office. He kept the country club membership. He was convinced that he could replace Nexus with new blood. Megan's leadership was even more catastrophic than I had predicted. She stopped paying the carriers on time, prioritizing the office renovation instead. Drivers, the lifeblood of the industry, started refusing to pick up Miller loads. Shipments sat on docks for weeks. I knew all of this because the industry is small. Vendors, carriers, and even other clients would call me at Nexus, laughing in disbelief. "Your sister tried to pay a freight bill with exposure on her Instagram," one carrier told me over lunch. She told me that being featured on her story was worth more than the $5,000 she owed me for the haul. "What did you do?" I asked, sipping my wine. "I put a lien on their trucks," he laughed. Meanwhile, at Nexus, we were flying. With the internal logistics division up and running, we cut costs by 25%. The product launch was flawless. James was over the moon. He gave me a bonus that was larger than my annual salary at Miller had been. But the silence from my family was the loudest part. Harry didn't call. Madeline didn't call. They were drowning, and their pride was the anchor dragging them down. Then came the 6-month mark. I was sitting in my new corner office at Nexus, looking out at the city skyline. The view was spectacular, much better than the view of the dumpster I had at my father's place. My assistant buzzed in. "Olivia, there's a Mr. Miller on line 1. He says it's an emergency. He's called 5 times in the last hour." I hesitated. I looked at the phone. I knew what this was. The creditors were likely at the door. The bank was calling in the loans. The face of the family had likely realized that a pretty smile doesn't pay the mortgage. I picked up the receiver. "This is Olivia." "Liv," Harry's voice was unrecognizable. It was cracked, weak, stripped of all its bluster and bravado. "Liv, are you there?" "I'm here, Harry," I said formally. "I'm in a meeting, so make it quick." We're in trouble, Liv," he stammered. "Big trouble. The bank is foreclosing on the main warehouse. The drivers are picketing the entrance. Megan left. She took a flight to Dubai with some influencer friends yesterday. She just left the keys on the desk and walked out. I felt a surge of cold anger. Of course she did. When the fun stopped, the parasite detached. That sounds like a difficult situation, I said, keeping my voice devoid of sympathy. I need you back, Harry whispered. The desperation was palpable. We made a mistake. I see that now. You were the glue, Liv. You were always the glue. Please, come back, fix it. I'll make you CEO. I'll give you whatever you want. Just save the legacy. I leaned back in my chair, swiveling to look at the city. I can't come back, Harry. I'm a partner at Nexus now. I have a fiduciary duty to my company. Then what am I supposed to do? He sobbed. I'm going to lose everything. The house, the pension, everything. I'm ruined. I let him cry for a moment. I let the sound of his regret fill the line. He had thrown me away like garbage, and now he was begging the garbage to save him. There is one option, I said slowly. Anything, he gasped. Name it. Nexus is looking to expand our warehouse footprint, I said, my voice sharp and businesslike. We need localized distribution centers. Your warehouse is in a good location. The trucks, well, the ones that haven't been repossessed are decent. You want to buy us? Harry asked, his voice trembling. No, Harry, I don't want to buy the company. The brand is toxic. No one will work with Miller Logistics anymore. I want to buy the assets. The assets? I will buy the warehouse, the remaining fleet, and the customer list. What's left of it for the value of the outstanding debt, I stated. It's a liquidation sale, Harry. I'm offering you a parachute. It's a small parachute, but it's better than hitting the ground. But the name, he whimpered, the Miller legacy. The legacy died 6 months ago, I said coldly. Do you want the deal or not? I have the legal team ready to draft the papers. You can sign them tomorrow. There was a long silence on the other end. Finally, I heard a defeated sigh. Send the papers, he whispered. I'll see you tomorrow, I said and hung up. I stared at the phone. I had just bought my father's life's work for pennies on the dollar. I had dismantled the kingdom that had exiled me and bought the ruins to build my own fortress. But the final confrontation wasn't over. I had to face them one last time to sign the papers, and I intended to make sure the face of the family was there to watch me take it all. The boardroom smelled of stale coffee and desperation. It was a stark contrast to the scent of expensive perfume that used to linger here when Megan was playing CEO. I arrived at 10:00 a.m. sharp, flanked by James and a team of 3 attorneys from Nexus. We didn't knock. I still had my key card, a small, petty victory I had kept in my pocket for 6 months, and I swiped us in. The beep of the lock disengaging sounded like a gavel striking a sounding block. Inside the boa room, the atmosphere was funereal. Harry sat at the head of the table, looking 10 years older than he had the last time I saw him. His skin was gray, his shoulders slumped, and he wore a suit that hung loosely on his frame as if he had shrunk inside it. Madeline was next to him, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, refusing to look at me. And then there was Megan. To my surprise, she had returned from Dubai. She sat on the edge of the table, not a chair, but the table itself, scrolling through her phone with a bored expression. She was deeply tanned, wearing oversized sunglasses indoors and a designer tracksuit that probably cost more than the current balance of the company's operating account. Finally, Megan said, not looking up as we entered. I have a spa appointment at 2, so can we hurry this up? I need my payout to clear before the weekend. James looked at me, a single eyebrow raised. I just tightened my grip on the leather portfolio I was carrying. Take a seat, Megan, I said, my voice cutting through the room like cold steel. You're going to want to be sitting down for this. I'm fine, she scoffed. Just give Dad the check so he can give me my share. I stepped down, okay? I'm consulting now. That's worth a buyout. Harry looked up, his eyes watery. Megan, please, just sit down. She rolled her eyes but slid into a chair, crossing her arms defiantly. I remained standing. I placed the stack of documents in the center of the table. This, I began, gesturing to the paperwork, is the asset purchase agreement. As discussed, Nexus Global is acquiring the physical assets, the client list, and the intellectual property of Miller Logistics. Great, Megan snapped. How many zeros? 0, I said calmly. The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning unit, a unit I remembered repairing myself 3 years ago. Excuse me, Megan laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. You're buying the company for $0. We are buying the company for the assumption of debt, I corrected. We are taking on the bank loans you defaulted on, the vendor payments you missed, and the payroll you failed to meet for the last 3 weeks. The total liability is $4 million. The assets are valued at $3.8 million. We are technically overpaying by $200,000 just to keep this company out of bankruptcy court. Harry put his head in his hands. He knew this. He had seen the numbers. That's ridiculous, Megan shrieked, slamming her hand on the table. The brand name alone is worth millions. I built a following. We have 12,000 followers on TikTok. Followers don't pay freight bills, Megan, I said softly. But that's not the only reason there is no cash payout. I signaled to one of the Nexus lawyers, who slid a separate, thinner file across the table toward Harry. What is this? Harry asked, his voice trembling. That is a forensic accounting report, I explained. When we did our due diligence for the acquisition, we found some irregularities, specifically in the marketing and travel budget. Megan went rigid. Her tan seemed to fade instantly. It turns out, I continued, addressing Harry but keeping my eyes locked on Megan, that the company retreat to Bali was not a tax-deductible expense. Neither was the lease on the Range Rover listed as a service vehicle, nor the $50,000 in consulting fees paid to a shell company registered to Megan's boyfriend. Harry opened the file. His hands shook violently as he turned the pages. He saw the credit card statements, the wire transfers, the blatant theft of company funds while the drivers were going unpaid. Megan, Harry whispered, his voice cracking. Is this true? You took money from the operating account. I was building the brand, Megan shouted, standing up, her face flushing red. I needed to look the part. You said I was the face of the family. Faces cost money, Dad. You can't expect me to look like her. She pointed a manicured finger at me. She looks like a librarian. I look like a star. You look like a criminal, I said, my voice low and dangerous. That is embezzlement, Megan. It's corporate fraud. And since you are the CEO, you are personally liable. Dad, Megan turned to him, pleading. Tell her to stop. She's just jealous. She's trying to ruin me. Harry slowly stood up. For the first time in his life, he didn't look at Megan with adoration. He looked at her with horror. The illusion had finally shattered. He saw her not as the golden child, but as the parasite that had devoured his life's work. I trusted you, Harry said, his voice gaining strength, rising from a whisper to a roar. I gave you everything. I pushed Olivia out for you. I told everyone you were the future. And you stole from me. You stole from the drivers. Gus has 3 kids, Megan. He hasn't been paid in a month because you needed a Range Rover. It's a business expense, she screamed back. It is theft, Harry slammed the file shut. It is over. I am signing the papers. You can't. Megan lunged for the pen, but James stepped forward, blocking her path with his imposing frame. Sit down, Ms. Miller, James said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Or we will call the authorities right now and have this conversation in a holding cell. Megan froze. She looked at James, then at me, then at her parents. She saw no allies. She slumped back into her chair, defeated, tears of rage streaming down her face. Harry picked up the pen. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a profound, crushing regret. I'm sorry, Olivia, he whispered. I was so blind. He signed the document. With that ink, Miller Logistics ceased to exist. The legacy was gone. The face of the family had rotted away, leaving only the hard, cold reality of the business I had built and subsequently reclaimed. The aftermath of the acquisition was swift and brutal, but necessary. In the weeks that followed, Nexus Global absorbed the infrastructure of Miller Logistics. We rebranded the trucks, repainted the warehouse, and installed our own management team. The name Miller was scrubbed from the building, replaced by the sleek blue and silver logo of Nexus. For Megan, the consequences were severe. Because part of the deal involved Nexus covering the debts, our legal team had the leverage to pursue the misappropriated funds. I didn't send her to prison. I didn't want the family name dragged through a criminal trial, but I did ensure she faced justice. We sued her for the embezzled amount. She was forced to liquidate her assets: the car, the designer clothes, the apartment Harry had co-signed for. She was left with nothing. The last I heard, she was working as a hostess at a chain restaurant in a different city, living with 3 roommates. The face of the family was now just another face in the crowd, learning the value of $1 for the first time in her life. Harry and Madeline faced a harder road. They lost the company, and because they had personally guaranteed many of the loans Megan had defaulted on, they lost their large estate as well. They moved into a small, 2-bedroom condo on the outskirts of town. 2 months after the signing, I went to visit them. It was a Sunday afternoon. I drove my car, the same sensible sedan, to their new complex. It was a quiet place filled with retirees. It was humble. When Harry opened the door, he looked different. The stress of the collapsing empire was gone, replaced by a weary acceptance. He was wearing a cardigan and jeans, holding a cup of tea. "Olivia," he said, stepping back to let me in. I didn't think you'd come." "I brought some groceries," I said, setting a bag down on the small kitchen counter. "And I brought some news." Madeline came out of the bedroom. She looked tired, stripped of her country club pretenses. She looked at me with shame, unable to meet my eyes. "Thank you, dear," she whispered. We sat in their small living room. The furniture was a mix of the few pieces they had saved from the big house. It felt cramped, yet strangely cozy. "I wanted to tell you," I said, looking at Harry, "that Gus and the other drivers kept their jobs. Nexus hired them all. We honored their seniority. They have their benefits back." Harry let out a long, shuddering breath. He took off his glasses and wiped his eyes. "Thank you, that was what kept me up at night, the people I let down." "You didn't let them down alone, Dad," I said gently. "You made a mistake, a big one, but it's fixed now." Harry looked at me, his eyes searching my face. Why did you save us? After what I said to you? I told you that you were better in the background. I treated you like an employee, not a daughter." "Because I am better in the background," I smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile. "The background is where the real work happens. It's where the foundation is. You forgot that, but I never did. I didn't do this for the Miller name, Dad. I did it because it was the right strategic move for my company, and because I couldn't watch you starve." Harry reached out and took my hand. His grip was weak but earnest. "I am so proud of you, Olivia. You are the CEO I should have had. You are the only legacy I have left." I squeezed his hand back. It wasn't a magical fix. The hurt was still there. The years of neglect wouldn't vanish overnight, but the war was over. The toxicity of the business was gone. We were just a father and daughter sitting in a small condo, picking up the pieces. "I set up a consultancy role for you," I said, pulling one last envelope from my bag. "Small scale. Nexus needs someone to mentor the junior dispatchers. It's part-time. It doesn't pay a fortune, but it will supplement your pension. It will keep the lights on." Harry looked at the contract. He looked at me, tears streaming freely now. "You'd hire me after I fired you." "I hire competence," I said, standing up to leave. "You know the routes better than anyone, Dad. Just stick to the logistics. Leave the vision to me." He laughed, a wet choke sound. "Deal." I walked out of the condo and into the sunlight. I took a deep breath. The air tasted sweet. I had my career. I had my dignity. I had crushed the entitlement that tried to erase me, and I had done it without losing my soul. I got into my car and dialed James. "It's done," I said. "Good," James replied. "Ready to get back to work. We have a global expansion meeting in 10 minutes. I'm on my way, I said. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. I wasn't in the background anymore. I was exactly where I belonged, in the driver's seat.